Welcome to Around the Empire. This is a fully independent podcast. Lend your support at rockfin.com/aroundtheempire, patreon.com/aroundtheempire, or paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Also, please like, share, and subscribe. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. Co-host today is Kelley Lane, and our guest is Jon Lancelot. We have a wide-ranging discussion on hybrid warfare, on cybersecurity, cyberdiplomacy, democracy, technocracy, and more. And in a bonus segment, we talk about what went wrong with the progressive movement and the creeping fascism in this country. Jonathan Lancelot is a cybersecurity analyst at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, and he's a principal policy analyst for the OSET Institute, focused on election cybersecurity in the context of national security. He has a Master of Diplomacy with a focus on cyber diplomacy and has been published in several journals. He also has an extensive technical background in computer science, and he's worked for Apple, the U.S. Senate, and the U.S. Department of Defense. We recorded this on July 21st, 2021. Welcome to Around the Empire. Tonight we have myself and Kelley Lane co-hosting, and we have a new guest, Jon Lancelot. Jon, it's great to meet you. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on here to speak about the very important topics.
Would you mind just taking a few minutes to tell everybody, introduce yourself to the audience since the first time on the podcast?
Yeah, so I am a subject matter expert in cybersecurity and cyber diplomacy. I work for a university, I do a lot of research, and I'm teaching courses in cyber politics and cyber ethics. But what I do on an everyday basis is that I get my hands dirty in the technology and the technical aspect of cybersecurity and cyber defense mainly. We usually, when we're doing the research, and I've done in the past, is that we research for ransomware, infrastructure, critical infrastructure attacks, methods of attack, defensive methods, and its effect on the rest of the world, economies and whatnot. So cybersecurity is really a wide open field, and that's what I pay attention to. I have experience in politics. I am a scientist, so I love everything mathematics. I love physics. The way I think of politics is mainly as if it were a machine itself, which it is. So I tend not to be partisan, but I'm a humanist. So if you want to say whose policies that I platform I like the Bernie Sanders policy grounds. But my policies are basically on just on the realpolitik side, where how do we make life better for a majority of the human beings on this planet. Right now, the systems that we have in place have been around for centuries. And now we're in a situation where we've built these machines with AI, and they're all over the world, and we carry them in our pockets, and they're being used. And it's changing the fundamentals of the way we communicate and the way that we interact. Whether you're talking about just a normal interaction with your family, your friends, or to nation-state or nation-state relationships in warfare. So what I tend to study is the effect that the news of a cyber attack, what the effect of a cyber attack, or the effect on the mind of a hacker. Hackers are to be respected because they have skills. I mean, if you take enough hackers out of, they could basically, send one of those rockets into space. They're very smart, but a lot are working for different interests. Whether you think it's a black hat hacker or a white hat or a gray hat hacker, it is a real profession, and it's a very powerful profession to be in. They're changing the world order. And I think a lot of governments, traditional governments, are having trouble trying to figure out how to control, first, technological innovation, and then second, cybersecurity. How do you defend your networks against attack? And so the machines that we have created in the past 100 years have now caught up to us. And now we have to think about the ethics of what kind of world we're going into. So what I tend to look into is, I tend to look into the future a little bit, not to predict anything, but to look at trends and components that we have already in reality and how it comes together into how we could rationalize how things are going to look. So I'm very interested in that and the effects that the technology has on human beings.
Yeah, that's a lot you've got on your plate there. And there are a lot of little bits in there that interest me that I'd love to sort of pull on those threads. Um, One of them being, since this is a war foreign policy podcast, we're always interested in that. And I recently did we talk about war, the traditional war. There are a lot of people talking about that aspect of it, but there's economic warfare and there's cyber warfare and there's these kinds of things that maybe we don't touch on enough. So, and I think what seems to me the trend is certainly toward something that you call irregular or hybrid warfare, or and you mentioned the term cyber realpolitik. What Give us some more on that, if you would.
So cyber realpolitik, to give you a bit of history on what realpolitik actually is a method of practice of politics that has no ideological basis. So Otto von Bismarck was the leader in German history that consolidated Germany into the state that we know today. Before they were broken up into different Prussian states, little kingdoms, and they were consolidated. It was never written on how he did it, but his method of doing it was basically using the present to try to figure out how to move politics forward. And so it was a very rational end to what he was thinking in the beginning, without even saying, well, we're going to ideologically believe in something in order to move things and move the population. Well, the method is move certain pieces and you gain a result. So cyber realpolitik is basically the same concept, except there are individuals involved with it. There are corporations involved with it. There's systems, automated systems involved with it. Worldwide, globalization has been a big mover towards this new world that we're going in. So when you think about world power and state power, mostly, before, like with the realist or the neo-realist, they thought of the states as one piece. So you had these different countries, but then they're working in an anarchic system. Well, if you break that up further, networks have broken that up significantly. And so the power base is so dynamic that the power base is not necessarily in the sovereignty of the government, but maybe because of the activity is causing a war somewhere, it forces the government to go somewhere instead of the government being a rational actor and saying, well, we're going to do A, B, and C because we have the power. Well, now the power is being shifted because these activities are becoming so pronounced, like cyber attacks, pipeline attacks, attacks on infrastructure. Even something like human rights violations could move a government towards an end that we don't know, war or some sort of collapse like what happened in Libya. These are huge things that happen, huge movements that has happened in the recent history that now we have to be forced to reckon how far are we balkanized? Are we balkanized to the point where, we can't rationally come together with a political plan to, let's say, make a good law? But now even with online, you can't even have a conversation. So even our conversations together as a population is broken up. So cyber realpolitik is more difficult because the pieces are smaller, but when you add cyber warfare to it, it makes it where you can't see what's coming. And so you can have all these bickering factions, but they get wiped out because ransomware, they get wiped out financially, or there's all sorts of criminal activity going on out there. And then defining what is criminal, cyber criminality or cyber warfare is increasingly more difficult. So it just leaves more questions. Cyber realpolitik is saying that the power is no longer with the state actors anymore. It is a little bit because they still have the power of the military, and even that's questionable. But now Google, Facebook, huge tech companies are holding huge amounts of power, and we don't know what it's going to turn into or how it's going to be resolved.
So in your article that you wrote, Russia Today, Cyber Terrorists Tomorrow, you addressed the hacking, alleged hacking. I think we still don't really know the whole story there of CrowdStrike and what happened. And you brought up the fact that how can we really even know if say they were Russian cyber hackers, how do we even know what if the government doesn't take responsibility for that? Then how can we know? And I think the problem, for most regular people that don't understand IT security, it's the problem of attribution. Like, how do we prove? Like, we are at the mercy of the corporate media, I guess, to tell us, which we know is often, informed by our intelligence. Who's responsible? And so we're supposed to kind of just take that at face value. And there are those of us that are kind of skeptical about that. And we want to have more evidence. But, we learned from Vault 7 that there are ways to make something look like it came from somewhere else. And so it leaves, I think it just leaves this, it's like why Russiagate is still really not, you've got this huge split based on where you sit politically, I guess, for most people, of whether or not you believe it. And I just want to know what the IT security is. I want experts to give me the evidence so I can make my own, as best decision. But I think that's the problem, because it is a huge field and we need more people. There are going to be more jobs than there are people to fill that. But it is complicated for your average person. It's hard for me to understand all of it, and I've been reading a lot. But so, do you want to just expound on that a little bit about attributing these attacks properly?
Attribution is one of the issues that we talk about all the time, and it's not an exact science. And unless you have everyone doing research on the basic codes and the logs that are involved in these crimes, and you can know for sure that it's attributed to whatever group that's doing it, and they're in this country, and then you have to establish whether they are part of the government, and then establishing that, it's tough. And so politics is not a good lens to look at this from, because politics is not a technical field.
Right.
So, when they say Russiagate and they say, well, the Russians were involved or the Russians were involved, I don't believe either side, because they're not doing the proper scientific looking at the logs, looking at all the technical language that the computers are saying. What are the computers saying? Have we done an adequate forensic analysis? And then it goes beyond forensic, because when you're talking about, attribution is a problem for nation states, because it's not just computers, it's people, it's culture, it's even goes to the time people wake up for work and when they don't, time zones. And it goes outside of the system, with social engineering. Was there a social engineering arm? Because then you can't look in logs for that. So you have to have investigators figuring out who's doing. You have to have a coordinating effort to say, for sure, this was this nation that did that. So I get very, very nervous when leaders of nation states are saying, this country did it, because they're telling the rest of the world what's happening. And people are like, well, I don't know. And people honestly don't know. And I think, yes, we need to know what's going on in the world. So our leaders should be telling us what is the best information. But when it comes to attribution and cyber attacks, that can escalate pretty quickly. You can really scare people with it. And the proportionality, one of my papers I wrote about cyber warfare, cyber diplomacy, and the rules of engagement. One of the very concrete parts of the laws of war is that your response has to be proportional. Now, has that always been followed? We could argue about that, probably not. But to the letter, cyber attacks should not warrant a hot war. But there's always linkage between conflicts online and physical conflict, whether it's a fight, whether it's some sort of falling out. It has consequences in reality.
Right.
So I wrote a paper about, for the Small Wars Journal, about India and Pakistan, and how they had a war that started on Facebook, and they had an air war. and they're pointing nuclear missiles towards each other. So that gives you a sort of perspective on the possibilities of cyber warfare and how dangerous it is. And attribution is very important, because you can't just go and say, hey, this is who it is, because to like millions of people, because you don't know until you have the right negotiations. It's a bit slower, but if you keep having quick reactions like that, it could end up in a disaster.
And it's downright embarrassing. If you've watched any like C-SPAN, I've made many clips from these hearings a couple of years ago on this topic of Russiagate. And it is embarrassing hearing, I mean, our Congress people don't know the tech, and they're struggling to even ask the right questions of DHS. And I've made a few clips of Christopher Krebs, who, I mean, it's stunning. He refers to scanning, that scanning, it happens all the time. It happens every day. And then yet in the next breath, he refers to scanning as like the smoking gun, that was the evidence that Russia interfered. And it's just, you're left just kind of like, you don't learn anything from those hearings because no real evidence is provided. And it's just, I think, yeah, we're left trusting people that don't even know the tech, and that's
Right.
not a good place to be.
I can explain scanning if you want. So scanning, it's funny because it happens all the time.
Well, no, I understand that concept more now, but at the time, you're just, if you don't know, what does it mean? It's routine. That's what the systems do. And was it targeted? I mean, he just didn't really answer it very clearly. So
Right.
Did you ever notice too with the congressional hearings, why don't you have a table full of 12 technical experts there at these things and let them, even let them have their own sort of let them hash it out a little bit. Let them try to explain it. There are so many ways you could approach this, but they never do that. I don't see. Maybe they do it in their subcommittee hearings or something, but they certainly never do it for the public. Well, so things.
Well, and then that adds
seem so scripted now, anyway. But that puzzled me, John. I imagine you had the same question, and Kelley. Why don't you bring some experts in here instead of Congress people sort of they're just reading something, or they're fumbling through. Anyway, just a.
Well, and that adds to the, I don't want to say conspiracy, but if you want people to trust the government, it sort of adds to that secrecy. Like people are saying, oh, they're hiding things, or they're not being honest. And that doesn't help anything. So I wish they would just be more transparent, and they've got to have experts, just like with election security, have many of them work it out together, because we can't ever have a trusted insider. We need to understand the tech enough that it's understandable for the general public, or we're just going to have continued distrust. So what's your take on that, John? I mean,
so therein lies the problem of governance today. They need experts to make decisions. So they bring, the CEO for Facebook into Congress, and they didn't know how to handle that. They bring in the CEO for Twitter. They didn't know how to answer or ask the right questions. So even if they had 12 experts there to help them, since they hold the power, they're the ones that are gonna be making the decision. And so experts have to also be scientists and also say that, what, I might not be right on this. Everything I might be telling you now on this interview might be obsolete in a year. I have to keep that in mind. So governance in itself right now is challenged, because no matter what legislators do to try to control with laws what happens in, let's say, the realm of cybercrime or the realm of cyber warfare, the technology is already advanced. They've already changed. And so that law is obsolete. And so we're going to start seeing more and more separation between what we call traditional power and international power or national power, and the actual power, which is human beings are online, human beings are on the technology, corporations make the technology, they call the shots. That's just the whole Hobbes, the whole social contract. The social contract has changed from what we agreed to how many hundreds of years ago until, well, we're going to use the computer and we're going to communicate through that. To me, that's like a ad hoc way of saying there's a new social contract and we have to talk about it. There's a lot of ethical issues with that. It's already changed.
Yeah, we should talk about it. I mean, I personally didn't sign any social contract, but just born into, I guess by staying, I agreed to it, maybe you could say. Um, but now maybe you're talking about technocracy and the things I'm seeing unfolding right now with these proposed great resets and such and global governance and so on. Like I agree with you that particularly with the issue of cybersecurity, but even just the issue of instant communication anywhere in the world, the borders are blurrier now. There are a lot of obvious things that I don't need to point out that this changing world, but I'm not particularly comfortable with either a technocracy or a global governance. I want to be closer to people who are my representatives, assuming that we even need a representative government anymore. Maybe direct democracy is the way to go. But I also believe in some of the aspects of our system, which is that majoritarianism can be really bad for some parts of society. If you're a minority, you want some, whether that's in uh, your person itself or the area that you live in is just smaller, and by some of the aspects of our government, sort of try to compensate for that kind of thing. And I'm not quite so sure that where we're headed. I don't know. Maybe it's just because I don't tend to be a Luddite in any way. I've always sort of embraced change. I'm excited by it. I'm not afraid of change usually. Now, I don't know if it's because I'm getting older but there's something about the changes on the horizon now that I find to be very disconcerting, very unsettling. Um, I think mainly it's because of the level of corruption that we've reached now that makes me nervous about anything like that. But
Well,
other,
corruption and also the surveillance and the censorship, with all that the social media is very scary. Like I just was working on a behind the scenes on an interview about Khashoggi, and maybe you guys saw what came out about, is it called Pegasus, that was put on all these journalists' phones.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of stuff is very scary. And if we don't understand it, we don't know how. I'm sorry, what?
Other world leaders too. A bunch of other world leaders had.
Oh, right. Wasn't it Macron? They
Macron.
found it was on his. So, I mean, yeah, if we don't know how to even detect, how is it that he didn't know, or he doesn't have a cybersecurity team that could have detected that was there? I mean, so they're getting the cybersecurity experts are hackers, white hat, black hat, and you said gray hat. I'm curious what that is exactly, but kind of in between. But they are, they're gaining more power than our government officials, and that's both scary and maybe good in a way. I don't know if government is becoming too powerful, it could be used for good. But what is a gray hat hacker exactly?
The gray hat hacker is basically someone that goes in between. They might do black hat activities, but then they give the information back to the company saying that we hacked you, but we decided that we like you guys and we like what you do. So protect yourself next time and goodbye. You know what I mean? It's sort of like there's all sorts of psychological profiles. Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe we could jump right into the pipeline hack then, because I remember something about the group that I supposedly took responsibility for that that they considered themselves to be the maybe gray hat hackers because they would only go after certain types of companies. Do you know any more about that?
Yeah, I do. Like basically, and a lot of people debate whether they're gray, black, or people probably say they're black hat hackers who just made a mistake. They turned around and they said that, look, we didn't want to shut down the whole East Coast. We were just in it for the money. So, and that exposed them to other forces. And then half of the money was taken. The money just spread all out. The government took some, they took some, and then the company lost everything, right? And they had to rebuild their systems, and we were all clamoring for petrol. Well, when I look at that issue, it could be one of two things. The whole charade could have been it could have been a charade. It could have been a complete fabrication. It could have been a test run for shutting down, the electrical grid. That's the way we sort of have to think, like, what it was. What they tell us at face value, you can't believe it because you don't know. You don't know the reasons. You weren't there planning a cyber operation. So you have to think like the hackers do. And, if they come out and they say, hey, we didn't want to do this, fine. But then somebody did it in your group. And whether that was done as a test run and you didn't know it, or whoever made the announcement, when you get into cyber conversations on what things are, to who, what, when, how, and why, well, it gets complex. It turns into a multivariable equation. So we have to be very careful when we talk about where these things are coming from and why. And that's where the nation state is stuck. Nation states, for the longest time, have called the shots on violence and warfare and policing. And, you could debate whether it did a good or a bad job. I think historically, governments have been kind of questionable to human life, basically, in a lot of different ways. But now we're in a situation where the technology is getting smarter, automated, AI, and machine learning. And so I don't know if I'm answering your question, but when you talk about gray or black hat hacker, you're talking about people. So we have to treat hackers as an instrument of a political instrument. Now, I'm one of those, because I specialize in cyber diplomacy, that you should be able to negotiate with hackers. Why are you doing this? Maybe we can negotiate something different, but nation states don't really do that. But the warfare is a people issue. It's not really a nation state issue. It's just nation states are in the mix because they've been in our lives forever. Now we're seeing a breaking down of that power because really, we're not just watching 4 channels anymore like they were back in the day. There's many different ways of getting information, and it's all on the instruments that we're using now. I mean, this interview is being done online. So it does tell you the power of technology, but the way to avoid, like it said, surveillance, a permanent program of surveillance, violations of privacy, and you look to how China is acting with this technology, how the United States is acting differently with this technology, how Russia is acting differently with this technology. We as a people have to have a very educated conversation on ethics. What do you expect from Google? What do you want from Google? What do you want from Facebook? Obviously, Facebook's not doing the right thing now. What do you want them to do? You can't expect them to change. You have to have an ethical, philosophical conversation and break it down. Otherwise, we're going to end up with a system that is so repressive, you won't get out of it, because computers are deterministic. You either get in or you don't get in. You could hack in, but if you're caught, then you'll get kicked out. Well, imagine your whole world like that. I mean, we have electric cars now that drive on roads, and they're going to have Internet of Things everywhere to track where they're going. You're going to have sensors on sidewalks. You're not talking about whole cities becoming cyber cities. And so we're automating everything, and we have to have these conversations, because otherwise we'll end up with something much worse.
Much, much worse. Currency, digital currency, electric grid, like you said, your vehicle, access to the internet can be flipped off. It could be switched off by an authority. Maybe this is a good, by a fascist authority, overreach. And
there's a good segue.
Yeah.
And go into that.
Do you want me to answer that about
can I ask you a real quick question before that? I've never heard the term cyber diplomacy. What, I can guess what that is, but is that a job that do companies hire you when they've been hacked to try to negotiate? Like, what is cyber diplomacy?
So when I studied at Norwich University, the university I got my master's in cyber diplomacy, is half technical and half policy oriented. Realizing that because they were military college, but I was able to go there as a civilian, learning how they look at it, they're looking at diplomacy more in the realm of defense because, now cyber diplomacy is being talked about, at least in the past 5 years. I don't know how it is now. It's been talked about social media communication. Social media communication between people, cultures, and world leaders. Obviously, that's a hot mess, but that's not just what it is. Cyber diplomacy basically looks at that and realizes a technical problem or algorithm problem, fix it, because it's causing issues. But cyber diplomacy is a technical field, because then you have to go and talk to governments about their technical problems and why things ought to not happen and why they're happening and where it's going. If you're not able to articulate the machine language that's causing whatever crisis is happening, then you're not going to be able to stop it, or you're not able to negotiate with or know what cyber operations are doing and route it. You need the diplomacy that able to talk to different technical groups, because different technical groups or different nation states act on a different level than your typical, level government's conversation on, well, you're doing this, you're doing that. We're not friends anymore. We're not allies anymore. We're going to go to war. That conversation basically is on its way out, because that causes problems, because then you could cause a war when you don't know that you've even been hacked. So cyber diplomacy is way deeper than social media. You have to have basically half of yourself dealing with people, half of yourself dealing with servers. That's basically cyber diplomacy, and know exactly, accurately be able to say on a scientific basis that this is around approximation of what's happening. We don't know who the problem is. Let's have a discussion on how to stop it and not go to war, because nation state issues are not the same issues as cyber warfare issues. Cyber warfare issues are way deeper. We could talk about that, because there's a lot of deep human problems that are still there that could cause that sort of thing. But nation state issues are way more complex and in a different way. But the people who are running things are using hammers to kill flies. So it's a very bad problem.
But would that come into play, like say with the pipeline hack or any attack on critical infrastructure? So that would be something that someone that has that experience would come in to try to mitigate? Or
I think the job of cyber diplomacy is to prevent war based on an error, like attribution, like slow down on that Russia talk, slow down on that China talk. If you have a real issue, like with the recent announcement on the state-sponsored cyber operation from China, and they laid down, I guess, indictments on these individuals that are in the advanced persistent threat group. It outs the whole situation. It's out in the open. Now is the time to have true diplomacy and say, you know what, let's stop this. But it's not going to stop, because nobody knows how to negotiate technology. Technology doesn't do what it does. People are going to make scripts all day and send them into the wild and have them do their thing. That's not going to stop until you're able to speak to it and understand what it is. You can't just discount hackers and be like, oh, these hackers are just people that are nefarious, whatever. You don't know the reasons why they're hacking. It could be people who need money. They might be trying to take care of their family. They might be in a war-torn country, very smart. You don't need to have a college degree to be a hacker. All you have to do is know how to use computers, know networks, and know how, people's behaviors, know how to code, and you're good. You don't need to have any sophisticated PhDs. And so, it's a human problem. And we have to have those human conversations on our world is changing, and we need to figure ourselves out, because the technology is basically going to destroy us if we don't do it, or we're going to destroy each other with our weapons. I mean, basically, we have weapons of mass destruction. Russia and us, we still have these nuclear weapons pointed towards one another. They don't tell us about it. Don't tell us how much they're reduced. Are we reducing our nuclear arsenal? Probably not. Something I suspect that maybe is increasing, but why? Okay, so we have this new technology where you can misinterpret when somebody says something and you say it back and then it becomes a big issue. Or look at the what happened in Haiti with the assassination of the president there, when it was done by mercenaries. Mercenary groups are becoming an international problem. And so that is added to this, that goes right into the cyber warfare, because they do participate in that, because they're mercenaries, they can do whatever they want. They don't have any state holding them back. These are the elements that are destabilizing our world. And the way I see it is not necessarily a bad thing, but the way to control it is to talk about it without fear. It's like, our world is changing. What can we do? And not wait for the state or any like famous person or any, grand poobah, whatever you think they're doing, to tell you what's happening. We're living this change every day. And so as someone who studies this every day and someone who's around it all the time, I consistently see this change. And everything that comes out in the news tells me that nation states as we have them today, and they started this process with globalization. They took themselves out of the markets and they said, we're not going to regulate international markets. Let's go ahead with globalization. And then we had these huge, powerful tech companies that came out of that. One of the many companies that came out of it. Then they can't really complain when we say, well, you know what, we might need to pull back on state power because it's not working. It's actually causing more damage to the human race, or the environment. So, but we don't want to be left with just corporate power. And that's the big problem. That's the big problem that's pretty new to the human experience, that we have these new governments now. I mean, they're corporations, they act like they're just selling things, they're innocent, they're selling things, but they have a lot of influence in our governments, and it's changing the fundamentals of what we do as human beings, is govern ourselves. So cybersecurity has its hands in everything, and it's a very unnerving thing to deal with, but it's also very exciting to think that we could have a new beginning and a new conversation on something as simple as politics. And I don't see anybody having that conversation. It's just bickering back and forth, and life goes on, right?
Well, I would love to talk. I think we'd probably need another hour for this topic, but I want to just touch on it because I know that you have done some work with, let's see, it's the Open Source Election Technology Institute. Mm-hmm. And there's this article written by Whitney Webb, who I know Joanne has interviewed at least a couple of times. But it's basically, it's all about election security and Microsoft's Election Guard, and all the ties between Microsoft and Galloy and the military industrial complex. And it's, it's not very transparent. So I wonder if you want to just maybe, I think we'd have to devote another segment to just that, to get into the weeds of election security. But I wonder if you want to just speak a little bit about what you've done for that, or for OSET.
Yeah, OSET, they're a very good organization. They do a very good work. They're working on software for elections, and they want to be fair, and they want to be nonpartisan, and they want to actually make voting accountable. And they have a method of doing it. And so that when they called me in, I sent you the article I wrote for them, which is saying that there's a systemic racism in our election electorate at the polls. And so it's an honor working with them because they have very noble intentions. But my opinion on this topic is definitely my own and not theirs. But my personal opinion on elections is that you have to bring in the blockchain. You have to bring the blockchain technology in. This is my personal opinion, and this is what I've seen from Estonia and the way they handle their elections. Even though it's a small country, we have a bunch of small states that could do this. We have a bunch of small counties that could implement this blockchain technology and make a technology more accountable, because make the voting and the counts more accountable. Because if you have any on the blockchain, if you have any discrepancy or there's any sort of hack, it breaks off into branches, and you could tell by looking at it that there's been an anomaly. And so the technology, each block is encrypted until its own segment, its own object. So that's why you can make it a currency, because you can't duplicate it. So that being said, our current voting machines right? And I think everyone is on the same page right here, are flawed and dangerous. Because basically, in our community, in the cybersecurity community, you've already determined that these machines are hackable, even hackable by by kids who just come in and use computers and able to hack into them. They're very easy, and they're basically just distributed into like junkyards after they're used, and somehow they're picked up again, and then they're used again. It's not a very clean process how the states use those machines. And if you know anything about code, you could press one thing and get another result. You could say, I'm voting for this person and get the other result. You'll never know. There's no accountability. It's a black box. So, when I've always held that, the blockchain would be a good alternative. I know OSET has their own technology that they're working on that I'm not at liberty to say what it is. But there's a lot of good people working on this problem. But eventually we're going to have to come to a conclusion on how we're going to move forward with our voting machines. Otherwise, we might as well go back to paper, because it's not a good place to put a machine that ones and zeros where you can manipulate the database and then completely change the outcome of an election. I think it's very dangerous. And honestly, like, it makes you doubt what democracy actually is. It makes you feel like it's sort of a placebo.
But does it concern you at all, those ties with, that's definitely this article that Whitney Webb wrote, the ties between the military industrial complex and these companies that are building these. We can talk about foreign interference, but we know that there's also internal interference. And ultimately, it doesn't really matter who builds it if it's still a black box and you can't see what goes in and comes out. We can't trust the results. Then it's not a free and fair election. So I wonder if you have any concerns about that.
I haven't, I need to read this article, but it sounds pretty insightful on the complexity of some of the companies that run our government and government infrastructure. Obviously, you don't want certain segments of institutional segments in elections. You want it to be pure, with the people, by the people. Trust that your neighbors are voting the right way because their votes are going through and your votes are going one way. Doesn't matter who's voting for who. Everyone gets what they want because they voted correctly. Those are things that sort of make people mad. I think that really sets people off. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle that you're on, or I can't even say side of the aisle, it's insane. But like whatever side of the aisles that you're on, your votes are not guaranteed. Basically, you could make a vote and you could have 100 people vote one way and it does some algorithm and then it just spits out what was programmed to spit out. And so we don't know, the companies that are doing, making these machines and the software are not accountable on the software. That means as a cyber researcher, as a computer scientist, I can't just go in there and then say, let me check out your software to make sure it's okay and it's legit. They won't allow you to do it. So how can you trust it?
You don't. And I think we really do need more cybersecurity journalism. Kim Zetter is one of my favorites that I try to read everything she puts out when I can. But we need more of that, much like we have medical journalism, because for the layperson, it's just very complicated. And I think we need more of that. And that goes into that trust, with our government. And
it's true. And also, and there's a lot of that out there with the cyber journalism, but also we need more education. And it shouldn't cost you anything to learn about this. As somebody who's an educator in the field now, and I'm gonna be teaching a course in cyber politics and cyber ethics, because it's a new field to teach in college even. A lot of colleges don't carry cybersecurity. Right now I'm going for a doctorate in cyber defense, and there's not a lot of doctorates in it. So it's a new field that has to be fleshed out. I think the public needs an education that's public. We have to bring public philosophy back into the human life. We have to say, this is the way things are going. This is what you should know. And because reporters only report you the facts, but the educators, right? Because we have teachers and we have professors and whatnot, that could help with this process of education, and not indoctrination, but information that people could actually use, something that's easy that people could grasp. It doesn't really matter to me. It doesn't really matter what degree somebody has. I think everyone has value. Everyone has a say. See, people should have a say, but when you don't know enough about the way that your world is going because you don't know if your voting machine is working, then we have to fix that. because then I don't care who you vote for. I want your vote to go through, and I want you to feel confident when you go home after your vote that it's done and you don't feel inadequate. I think a lot of us are uneasy that when you go to the polls, we just don't know. And then they tell us, oh, this person won. It kind of falls flat. So, yeah.
Right. So, Joanne, do you want to go to, Joanne, you're muted, I think.
Yeah, sorry.
Do you want to go to one of his questions about progressivism, or?
I just want to make one point to sort of tie together what the two of you just said. We need more cyber journalism. We need more education. I mean, journalists can help with that too, and so can indie media, right? We can bring on guests. We can, just choose topics that help people understand. You can learn in lots of different ways, right? So, but yeah, I think until we have a population, and I do think that this is happening a little bit to some extent, because now people growing up now, their whole lives have been internet, unlike us where it happened somewhere in our lives. So, but yeah, and my issue with blockchain, I don't want to take a big issue with it though, is that, in the process of translating that vote into blockchain, that can be manipulated. I think unless everyone, and to restore trust, it has to be something that everyone can do, which is a simple paper ballot. You can, and there has to be more people allowed to watch and view the process and participate in the process. When I saw how Britain did their Brexit vote, sort of in big gymnasiums, all of it on film, and then someone going up on stage and announcing I thought, that's a 75 million or 65 million country, 65 million people. That scales. That means that scales. We could do that. We could do that. So I've been in engineering and tech my whole life, but I don't believe in automating everything just because you can. And I think that's a big mistake that we're making. And almost my whole life has been about automating things, but there are some things that don't need to be automated. And my personal thought is this is one of them. Now, when you get to tabulation, right, you gotta filter all that stuff up. You're gonna need some kind of system. But at least at that point, you have some. Anyway, I don't want to get into this too much, in my opinion.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I'd rather go back to paper myself on that, because, if we're going to go down the technology route, use the best technology, but I'd rather we just go back to paper and make that the way we do it, because it's an ancient institution. Why you can't upgrade that?
Yeah, it has to be something everybody can understand. Even think like everybody's saying, well, it'll be blockchain. Well, it'll be open source. Well, how many people does open source matter to? How many people can go to GitHub and, examine the code? Even experts, you know what it's like to try to read somebody else's code and figure out a whole system, and there'll be services and there'll be APIs and everything else. And it's not going to be that simple. And even with blockchain, definitely a step up better. But I don't know how many people could really certify that everything from soup to nuts, was legit. And I mean, if you could be sure that the votes accurately got recorded on blockchain, yeah, you'd be in a lot better place to having. It's basically a big, it's an encrypted audit trail. It is what it is. It's not that complicated. So I don't know.
Well, Jonathan Simon wrote in this article, and this was perfectly put. I always say it as, we need it on Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader level, which he put in a better way. He said, pending a demonstration showing with perfect layperson accessible clarity how a third-party entity can verify aggregate vote counts without having to take on faith some step in the pipeline, individual verification that your vote was counted, is a useless bell and whistle. It still feels like the same old trust us game. So as long as you have some step in that process that you have to trust someone else, then no, it's not It's not useful. It's not valid. So we have a long way to go with that. I don't know.
And that's the problem with democracy. It's like, how do you verify that how do you verify that the right person won? All through the history of democracy, it's very difficult. Even ancient Greece had issues with that.
And look what's happened in Arizona. And I mean, the expense that we're all, what's gone on and trying to verify. And I think nobody should be complaining about those audits. They should be expected. But it's very expensive and just, I don't know, causes more division, I think. So,
and the secret ballot, if you want to have a secret ballot and a transparent tabulating system, that's really tough to do. That's just a tough requirements for any problem, any system to solve any problem, because if everybody was willing to sort of well, you should be able to go check that your vote counted, but
so
do you want your neighbor to be able to look up how you voted?
I mean, people talk about politics anyways. People wear the shirts, people like go out, do I want my neighbor to know who I voted for? I mean, it's a public record. Democracy has to be public in order for it to work properly. You can't have it one way, because the thing is, you want to be secret about it, then the leaders that you have in power is going to be secret too, because they're going to do what they want and they might not have won. So you have to give up a little bit of the secrecy, because really, there's really no way to verify it. And that's like the age-old problem with democracy, is that it's a part of culture. It's not just a process. It's a part of the culture of the country, and it has to be ingrained. And right now, what I see in the United States, and maybe it's the way that it started because they wanted to limit democracy, is that now people are just fighting and they're not being democratic. They're not trying to figure out, how do we make this process better where we don't get owned by a dictator or one day, or get our government governments doing more repressive things. It's a big problem, and I'm skeptical about what's going on now. And anyone that should be, I think a lot of people are.
Well, I think the problem with maybe your vote, people knowing your vote, comes into play, but it's like an employer. I mean, that could be a problem. I mean, I personally know someone who feels pretty sure she was fired because of her political stance in a certain environment. So those kinds of things are real. I mean, that's how tribal we've become and how heated and divisive everything is. So that may be the concern. Otherwise, you're right. I think a lot of people are very open about their politics, but there are certain areas like your employer that you might not want them to know. So
employees shouldn't have a say. There should be a law saying if you shouldn't have a say. In a democratic country, exactly. So it's questionable democracy can even exist under those conditions, because then if everything is to be secret because you don't want some power over you to know that you're voting, you don't know if your vote's actually going to be counted. It really leaves a gap for advantage, and so you have to question whether it's even practical to even think that we have a democracy that's worthwhile, or I think the democracy that we have is worth saving, but we have to be willing to make some significant changes to society in order for it to work, after we're gone.
So I really want to ask the question, should we do it as a bonus, Joanne, about
I was just going to say, I'm looking at the time. It's probably time to roll into a bonus question here.
I thought what's wrong with progressivism and why is fascism lethal would be. What do you want it? Or
yeah, I definitely think more conversation about fascism needs to be had right now, because I'm feeling it around us. So how does that sound for a bonus question, John?
Oh, that's a great bonus question.
The answer to the bonus question is in the extra bonus segment for patrons. You can get access to all bonus content by subscribing at Rockfin or Patreon, plus other perks like patron live streams, Zoom calls, and access to our Discord channel where we can talk among ourselves. So that's my pitch, and I hope that some of you will join us. And now I'll continue with the interview wrap-up. If you would, John, tell everybody how to follow you, if they could follow your work, and how to support you and things like that.
Yeah, so if you type my name, Jonathan Lancelot, in Google, You'll see my articles. You'll see my Small World Journal articles. You'll find my Twitter on there. I don't even remember my Twitter handle really.
Where are you most active? Like if people want to talk with you or something, on Twitter or other social media? Or?
I try to not stay on social media
Me
because
too.
of my job, but I could pretty much tell you my Twitter handle, and so I could have everyone contact me if they want.
Yeah, I'll link it in the show notes too.
Well, I definitely want to keep the conversation going, in the future as we do our job as independent journalists covering cybersecurity. I think that it's so important. So I think, having people like you that can speak on it, and you have the knowledge is key. So
it's key. And I really appreciate your show and what you're doing. And my Twitter handle is Lancelot Politic, at Lancelot Politic. So with no S, just politic.
Got it. Well, come back and talk with us again soon, John. It was great to meet you.
Oh, it's great to meet you, and it's good to see you again, Kelley, and I hope to be back at some point.
Definitely.
Thanks for listening. Special thanks to Jon Lancelot. Follow John on Twitter at Lancelot Politic. This podcast is independent media. Listener support really important. rockfin.com/aroundtheempire, patreon.com/aroundtheempire, paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Find the podcast on any mobile podcast app. Find everything you need at the website aroundtheempire.com. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe. Also follow on Twitter at Around the Empire, and we'll see you next time. Take good care, everybody. Hang in there.